good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to all of our attendees tuning in from around the world. Today's broadcast of Invisible Women in Sport is an Institute for Sport and Social Justice production. I'm your producer, Garnett Overby. All guests will be muted during this production, but I encourage you to use the chat feature to ask questions or leave a comment. We will reserve time near the end to answer a few questions. So now, without further ado, I would like to welcome our host, Taylor Middleton.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Season 2, Episode 8 of Invisible Women in Sport. I am your host, Taylor Middleton, and today I am joined by Dr. Nikki Franke, the first and only head coach of women's fencing at Temple University. She's a two-time Olympian and a two-time national fencing foil champion. How are you doing today, Dr. Franke?
I'm doing well. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. Can you tell us the importance of this picture that we have up right now?
It's basically my passion. You know, I coach because I love coaching and trying to instill in the young ladies that come through our program, not only how they develop as fencers, but how they develop as people, and try to really be a mentor to them.
That's so good. And thank you for being here with us. We really appreciate it. And we also have another picture of you as well that we know that's very important to you. So can you tell us a little bit about this one?
This is a very old picture of you. Turned so gray. But as an athlete, when I was still starting out, right after I graduated college and had started at Temple and was training during that time here in Philadelphia.
Well, thank you so much. I'm sure this is great and a little throwback for you. So just to get started, when did you start fencing and how did you go about telling your family that you were going to start fencing?
I was always involved in sports in high school. And my senior year of high school, believe it or not, a new teacher came and she started a fencing club. And I had been on the tennis team and the basketball team. And I said, well, that sounds interesting. I'll go check it out. And I went to the club. There was a club and I found that I really liked it and she encouraged me and then got me going to different competitions outside of school. And the rest, as they say, is history. But it was purely by chance, by luck that I got exposed to it. And you know, you can't imagine starting a sport your senior year of high school in this day and age, but back then it was possible.
Mm-hmm. So then how was it like telling your mom about it when you started?
She was like, fencing, what in the world is that? You know, I grew up in Harlem and I was, you know, my mom was always very supportive. It didn't matter, you know, I had an older brother and it didn't matter what we wanted to do. As long as we were committed to doing it, then she would support it. And, you know, and she was probably one of my biggest fans as I continued with fencing. She was very, very proud, but whatever, you know, if that's what you want to do, just commit to it and do it to the best of your ability. And that was her philosophy always.
Right. So then you also mentioned that you played other sports. So how was it transitioning into fencing from like a technical level and just mentality wise?
I think it was pretty easy because I was involved in other sports. It was pretty easy to then be able to try something new and to fit right in. And so when I switched over, the biggest transition was going to college and realizing that you were just going to do one sport and not doing multiple sports, but specializing in one sport.
So then even talking about college, can you talk about the path of how you went from ending up at Brooklyn College and who got you there?
Again, a lot of things. I've been very blessed. You know, God's put a lot of good people in my life to mentor me. In high school, when I started doing the outside tournaments, I started meeting some people and they started to ask me, well, where are you going to go to college? And I grew up a few blocks from City College in New York, and that's where my brother had gone. And that's where my mother assumed I was going to go, because in our household, it wasn't, you know, where you're going to go to college. It was, which college were you going to go to? I mean, education was always stressed and very important. And so people that I met at tournaments would say, well, no, instead of going to City College, you should go to Brooklyn College because we have a really good fencing program there. And we have a coach who was a member of the Olympic team. And you really, I'm on the team there and you should come and fence with us. And so they convinced me to go ahead and apply to Brooklyn College. And that's how I ended up there fencing under Denise O'Connor, who was a wonderful mentor and coach to me and really taught me a lot about the sport.
I think
Taylor's
Dr.
frozen.
Frank, maybe Taylor is having some technical difficulties right now. And I think she's trying to come back on, but just to continue that conversation. So talk to us a little bit more about what that experience was like for you being a fencer and being an African-American woman fencer. What was that like for you?
Well, there definitely, when I started, there were not very many of us, but there was a small community that was very accepting and very inclusive. And but when you went to tournaments, there would only be a handful of African American fencers there. So you really were one of a few. But it was also, fencing was its own community also, and I've made some very, very good friends in fencing that are lifelong friends.
Outstanding, wonderful. So then you made that transition from actually being a fencer to actually becoming a professional. So what was that transition like for you?
Like everything else that happened with fencing, it was purely by chance. After I graduated from Brooklyn College, I had a major in health and physical education, and I decided that I wanted to focus on public health. And I've always, I always wanted to be a teacher. I never grew up saying I wanted to be an Olympian, but I always grew up saying I wanted to be a teacher. And so when I was graduating, there had been several Brooklyn College graduates who had gone to Temple to get their master's, and Temple taught fencing classes. So they always needed someone who had fencing experience. So my coach, Miss O'Connor, and my mother conspired, because I had no intention of leaving New York whatsoever. And they really conspired and got me to apply to Temple. And their reasoning was, if you wanted to teach school in New York, you had to have a master's degree within 5 years anyway, so that you might as well go ahead and get your master's and get it over with, while they are going to pay you tuition for you, and all you have to do is teach a couple of fencing classes. And so I ended up at Temple. And when I got there, they had a men's team, but they only had a women's club. And so all I had ever known was a team. And at that time, the men's and women's athletic departments at Temple were totally separate. And the women's athletic department was very educationally focused, very student oriented, and very much tried to address any interest that the female athletes had. And to them, volleyball was as important to the volleyball player as basketball was to the basketball player. There wasn't a hierarchy. So I went into the athletic director, her name was Barbara Lockhart, and I said, why don't we have a team, a women's team? Why is the women just a club? And she said, well, I don't know, should we have a team? And I said, well, yes, that's all I knew. And so, being extremely naive, having just gotten out of college and not having any idea what I was asking for, she said, well, if you can get enough people, we can do that. And so, lo and behold, we started the Division I fencing program based on, if you can get enough people, we can do this. And so my first All-American was a field hockey player who came out after field hockey season. The first year, girls would come to practice. I go, okay, tomorrow, bring a friend. And that's how we built our program, between that and getting girls out of the fencing classes that I was teaching. And we started from scratch, from nothing, and developed into a national level program.
Wow, that's an amazing story. If you hadn't had the, well, it started with your mother. She didn't have the courage to conspire against you. And then just the simple asking a question, and look what grows out of there. So that's a good lesson for, especially, I know we have some young audience that's with us today. It's a good lesson for them to learn. If you don't ask the questions, you may never know, and you never know what might come out of that. So
Exactly.
I believe Taylor is back on with us. Are you there, Taylor?
I am. My internet was conspiring against me today. So I apologize about that, everybody. So I guess just to move on from what Garnett had asked and kind of pedal back a little bit, after going through that experience of asking a question, can you talk about the relationship that you had with your coach when you went to college?
Miss Denise O'Connor was an amazing woman. She really was a mother to the team. We were all known as Denise's girls, and very well known in the fencing community. And I think that kind of buffered a lot of my experience in fencing, because I was one of Denise's girls. And I think I may have been treated a little bit differently than someone who didn't have that connection. But she very much was a mentor, very much was an encourager, and was someone who, to this day, I still stay in touch with and thank for the opportunities and the guidance that she gave me.
Can you go into a little bit more detail on the comments you made about being treated a little bit differently because you were on the fencing team at that time at college?
I mean, at that time, you were talking about the late 60s, early 70s, and there was a lot going on in this country right then, to today. There was a lot of turmoil. There was a lot of questioning about the way African Americans and people of color were being treated. And so I went to Brooklyn College, which had about 35,000 students. And of that group, there were probably about 50 people of Black and Hispanic or Latino students at the school. So we were very much in a minority. Most of our classes, we were the one and only. And there were protests about various things at the university and the way things were being done. There were sit-ins. There were, got involved in some of these protests and sit-ins that were there on the campus. And it was a difficult time. And yet that's one of the things I think about sport. It kind of gives a common ground or a common ground to everything. Even though maybe people on the team disagreed with my political views and things that I was doing, when you went to practice, you were part of the team. And you were treated as part of the team. And I think that's one of the amazing things sport can overcome a lot of the differences that people have, because you actually get to know someone. When you're out protesting or sitting in, you're seen as part of a group and labeled however people want to label you. But they see you every day and they see you work hard and they interact with you. And it makes a different relationship. And so I think one of the neat things about sport.
I think that's really telling, just with all the athletes that have been speaking out recently, with the many, like the turmoils that have just been going on in the last year and a half, going on 2 years. So I think it's important that you kind of had that space where you could voice your political views, but still be understood by your teammates enough to perform and do what you needed to do. And clearly you had support from your coach as well. So even with that, eventually you went on to end up being her teammate at the Olympics. So how was that experience for you, going from, athlete to teammates?
I had the pleasure of being on the 76 team with Miss O'Connor, and she was the oldest on the team at that point. I think she was 40, and I was the youngest. And it was an amazing experience because she was still telling me what to do and and still kind of guiding me. But I had a lot of respect for her, and I'll never forget the first time, we used to compete against each other at different competitions. And I'll never forget the first time I beat her in a competition, and I just kind of stood there. I didn't know what to do. And she just came and just gave me a huge hug and said, "Great job," because I didn't know what to do.
Mhm.
So that's the kind of person she is.
So how was that too, like your experience at your first Olympic Games? How was all of that for you?
There's hardly a way to describe it. I mean, it's an amazing experience. The nice thing is 76 team was in Montreal, and so my whole family could be there. My husband could be there,
Mm.
my grandmother, everyone. So it was just fantastic to meet all of these athletes, famous athletes that you hear about and you see on television, and to get to talk with people and get to know them a little bit, get to watch different sports at such a high level, and get to meet people from all over the world. And it's just an amazing experience. And marching in during the opening ceremonies is just, it's hard to describe the and how proud you feel of having accomplished a goal like making an Olympic team.
So then just having that experience and getting to enjoy that, how did it feel with the next upcoming Olympics in the 80s and the boycotts that were going on, and kind of how does that compare to what's been happening today?
The boycott was very difficult. I think for me, I think, fortunate in that I had a lot of things that I was doing. And so I had somewhat of a balance in my life. I was teaching class, I was coaching, I was training, I was going to graduate school still. Started my doctoral program. And so I have always been someone who stayed busy and always had a lot of things going on. And so, at that time, there wasn't funding for athletes or for fencers anyway. So you were spending your own money and to train, to pay a coach, to travel to tournaments. And you finally make a team, and then something totally outside of your control takes it away. And it was very difficult. It was very frustrating and disappointing. I knew people who had put their lives on hold for 4 years to make that team. They didn't have the luxury of doing all the other things that I was doing. That's all they were focused on. And to have that taken away was very difficult. And unfortunately with COVID and with the Tokyo Games being postponed, at least there's a chance that they're going to happen. So those athletes could still have hope that, okay, this year, in a few months, this is actually going to occur. Whereas we knew that was it. And I knew that was my last games, that I wasn't going to train for 4 more years because there were other things that I wanted to do. And so I knew that was it for me. But for some of the athletes, they extended another 4 years. And for some of them, that was it. And it was very, very disappointing.
Mhm. And there was a lot of athletes that kind of went through that last year. We spoke briefly about it, being that like I was one of the track and field athletes whose season got cut when COVID happened. And right now they're kind of trying to decide what they're going to do about the Olympics, and it's a little all over the place. But you had athletes who literally stayed in college for a whole nother year just to try to get that opportunity for other sports, not just track. So definitely seeing kind of like it wasn't as extreme as what was going on back in the 80s, but you definitely see a lot of things with public health and just making sure everybody is safe, but also trying to make sure that like these athletes still get that opportunity to compete and show what they have going on. So it's just crazy to see how they mirror.
Yeah, like you said, there's health reasons. You have to be concerned about safety and people's health. And, this, pandemic is serious, and a lot of people and a lot of families have suffered. The difference back in 1980 was it wasn't a health issue, it was politics. And it was politics that made a decision. It was a political decision, which really you had no control over, and you knew it wasn't going to make any difference. I think that was the thing that bothered me the most, that I knew doing that really wasn't going to matter and it wasn't going to make a difference. But we were used as the pawns in that.
Man. Well, despite all of those things that have happened, you've managed to accomplish so much. So what would you say in your eyes is your biggest accomplishment, or that you always look back on, you're like, yeah, I did that? Like,
Well, making the Olympic team, of course, that's something that I will always cherish. I think our 1992 team won the NCAA Women's Foil Championship, and that's another really bright spot in my career. We were the underdogs. We weren't expected to win. We had a young team, but they were just fearless and relentless and persevered. And so I will always treasure that team and that experience. Again, just I've been very, very fortunate, and a lot of good people have been put in their path, and really helped me.
well, even with that accomplishment, how does it feel being held to a bit of a higher standard as the only African-American female head coach in the country for fencing? Do you feel like, there's a lot that comes with that, or there's things that you've had to say?
It's difficult. When I first started out, I think I ran into a lot of the typical, I had a male Caucasian assistant coach, and someone would come in the room and they would immediately go to him thinking he was the head coach. There weren't many African Americans in fencing, and definitely not as coaches. It's a very male dominated coaching coach sport. A lot of international coaches also. So the fact that I was an American and African American and a female, that's not what a fencing head coach looks like. So, until people got to know me and I guess got somewhat of a reputation, it was really very typical of the reactions that people had. One of the things I'm very proud of is trying to help get more female coaches out there. Right now, I probably have a little more than a dozen of my former fencers that are now coaching, and I'm really very, very proud of that. There aren't a lot of female coaches in fencing, and the more we can encourage women to do that, the better it is for the sport, and the more it encourages young girls to get involved in the sport.
And so then how important was it for you to implement an all-female coaching staff? Because, we talked about that. I had an all-male coaching staff on my track team, and I feel like if we just had one woman in our staff, it would have made a difference. So how was that for you?
It's really, I've had a lot of male coaches throughout the years and female coaches, and it just so happens right now we have an all-female staff, and not only are they all female, but they are two of my former athletes. And so they know our program and they know our system, and they are so committed and dedicated to our program and our fencers. And so it's really a pleasure to see them in this new role for them as adults, where I've known them as teenagers, seeing them grow and really mature and become wonderful young women who are committed. So it's been really nice to work with them.
That's great. So then what would you say has been the hardest decision you've made as a head coach?
Oh gosh. Probably the hardest decision was a young lady I had many years ago who was a phenomenal fencer, but really struggled with her academics and struggled with doing the things that she needed to do, and keeping her home, making a decision to keep her home from an NCAA was very, very difficult. And for me, as I'm sure for her, but again, it was important that everyone understand that everyone has the same standards that they have to meet, and everyone is going to be held accountable for their actions. But that was not an easy decision, but I think it was one that had to be made.
Now, with everything that you've done, you have your master's, your PhD, you've been coaching, you've been teaching, you just recently retired about 5 years ago, like we talked about before. And I see Miss Jackie kind of beat me to the question a little bit, but how important was it for you to help found the Black Women's Sports Foundation and have that out there as an opportunity for women?
It was a blessing. It really was. Tina Sloan Green, who was one of my friends and definitely one of my mentors. Jackie knows her. People who know Tina, they know that Tina has a way of getting you involved in stuff, and you have no choice. We had started with Carol Oglesby, who was at Temple at the time, and Linda Green, who was a law professor. We had started going to conferences with the Women's Sports Foundation, and in going to these different conferences, realizing that they were not really addressing some of the specific concerns of people of color and coaches of color and athletes of color. And so we started running our own conferences and started pulling in women who were interested in getting into coaching, who were in coaching, administration, but just talking about the whole gamut of opportunities that you can have in athletics. It's not just coaching. And so trying to bring athletes in, high school athletes in, and letting them meet and talk to and see people who look like them that were doing all kinds of fantastic things in the sports arena. And so being co-founding that foundation, we have continued to this day, really focusing on providing opportunities to young people in non-traditional sports. That really focused a lot of grassroots programs to let girls know that there are lots of sports out there that you can do. And so we focus on lacrosse and golf and tennis and fencing, all the things that they don't necessarily think they can do or know anything about.
Mm-hmm. And that's very important. When I got to the program here, they had something going on outside where we could go learn how to golf. And I never played golf before. And now I'm like super obsessed with it. So I always want to go to like Top Golf. I haven't played 18 holes, but driving range, I can do that all day. So I do think that's super important. I think there's a lot of opportunities for people to find enjoyment out of other sports, not just your typical, sports that technically make people all this money. Like there is a lot of other stuff out there. So again, we really appreciate having you here today. And I'm actually about to come up on my last question. So if anyone has any more questions for Dr. Franke, please drop them in the chat and then we will go to Q&A after. So as my last question, is there any advice that you could give to young women either looking to go into a new sport or even just looking to go into the sports industry? As we know, like I'm about to graduate soon, so I'll take all the advice I could get. And I'm sure there's young girls in here as well that would want some as well.
Yeah, I think, it's just important to put it out there that, you're graduating or that I'm looking to move into this position, doing informational interviews. I think people love to talk about, people are going to be very generous in their time if you talk about something that they love doing. And so, reaching out to people who are doing or in the positions that you might want to someday be in and finding out what was their path. How did they get there? What are the pitfalls? What are the things that they enjoy most? I heard the other day, and I won't take credit for it, but I think it's really important. Someone said, it used to be who you know that was important, and now what's important is who knows you. And so putting yourself out there and getting people to know who you are and what your aspirations are, I think in this day and age is very, very important.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Franke. I am going to pass it off to Garnett for the Q&A. And of course, I really appreciate you being here. And I'm sure there's great questions on the way. So thank you.
Thank you, Taylor. It was great.
Dr. Franke, this was great time being spent with us today. So we're really appreciative of it. There are a few questions. The first question comes from our very own Olivia Wiggins. And she's asking, when looking to hire people on your coaching staff or in a support role, what standout qualities do you look for?
I look for, number one, someone who is really passionate about what we're asking them to do. Even if it's my graduate extern and they're just doing administrative work, but do you enjoy doing that? Do you enjoy being detail oriented? Do you enjoy helping to make things run smoothly? And so I look at, what their goals are, what they want to get out of the position, how they want to grow, and also what they bring to the table in terms of their knowledge and their passion and love for what they do.
Outstanding. This next question comes from Don DeJulia, and I think this was something that we were actually talking about before we started the call. The question is are there many high schools in the area that offer fencing? And I guess the follow-up to that is, if a person wanted to get involved in fencing at the youth level, how would they do that?
In the Philadelphia area, there really are not many high schools that have fencing. There are a few in the suburban area. Back in the day, there were several schools in Philadelphia that had fencing, and there were some Olympians that came out of Ben Franklin High School, for instance. But today, there really aren't many. Most of the fencing is in clubs. There are some clubs in the area, and if someone's looking to start fencing, they can go to usafencing.org, which is the national governing body, and they will have a list of clubs in the different areas that you can contact.
Outstanding. Awesome. Thank you for answering that. We have two questions actually from Kennedy Collins. So the first question is what's the best advice you received in your career?
The best advice I received in my career was to always listen. My coach told me, if you go to different, you make different teams and you have different coaches. And she always said, you listen to everybody, you take what you want, you leave what you don't want, but you be respectful and you listen to, because everyone has something to offer. And I truly feel that. And so I have learned from so many different people. But the major thing was just to listen to what people the advice they have to offer, and to take it to heart and to think about it and to use what you can. None of it knows it all.
Okay, and Kennedy's second question was, you've held multiple roles at different times. How did you manage it all?
With a lot of support. I couldn't have done what I did without the support of my mother in the beginning, who really sacrificed to send me to tournaments and encouraged me tremendously. And then my husband, he is, again, he holds me up and supports me and encourages me and balances all the craziness in my life. Someone has, I'm always late picking the kids up from daycare, and he had to run and get them. And so the things, the support system is so important. I could not have done what I did, what I've been able to do, without the support of my family and those around me.
Absolutely, that support system is key.
Yeah,
it's definitely
you can't do it without it.
You can't.
Making choices. If you don't have the support, then you have to make choices. Do I do A or do I do B? As opposed to how can I do A and B with someone's help and support.
Absolutely, absolutely. This question similar to Kennedy's question, but I think it's a little different slant. This comes from our very own GA Larissa Campalo. She says, how did you manage to deal with challenging moments throughout your career?
First, you take a deep breath. I have gotten to the point in my life, I think earlier on, I kept a lot of stuff in and would not respond and just kind of internalize things. And now, and it may just be age, but it's like, I just, try to help people see what they're saying, or ask, well, what makes you say that? Or what makes you think that? And just trying to hold people accountable for the things that they do and say. Even with my team, as I tell them, everything that, comes into your mind doesn't have to come out of your mouth. Sometimes you need to just think a little bit before you say something. And so, I think that's something that this generation, everything is so instantaneous, and we tweet it or we put it out there, and think a little bit first, before you start putting stuff out there. And when stuff is out there that isn't right, to hold people accountable and to call them on it.
And that has probably been a common response to a lot of the women that have been guests on our show here. Exactly what you just said is that they have to really be mindful of what they're going to say and when and where to say it. So for the men out there, we should pay attention to that, men, because we don't have to necessarily do that. But our women, they have a different perspective and a different, outcome and outlook in life. The next question actually comes from our very own CEO, Delisa O'Mealy. And I kind of had a similar question. So I'm going to ask her question. Delisa is saying, what's the outlook for increased diversity in fencing?
There are organizations and people out there that are trying to increase the amount of people of color that are involved in our sport. It is an expensive sport. And when I first started, a lot of the minorities that fence learned in school, they learned it in either high school or college. Now that doesn't happen anymore. It's very difficult to be a walk-on and start a new sport in college. And so that now depends a lot on the clubs. There's an organization in New York called the Peter Westbrook Foundation that has done a phenomenal job in working with underrepresented youth, in exposing them to the sport. And he's had several Olympians come out of his program. And that is, we have several programs throughout the country where now we are really trying to increase visibility of fencing to underrepresented populations and to especially youth, to let them and to expose them to it.
Thank you for that answer. Very insightful. Here's a fun question for you. This comes from Kennedy Collins. She's asking, is fencing like how it is portrayed in the movies?
Not at all. It's no one's hanging from chandelier and swashbuckling. It's a very controlled situation and area that you have to stay within. But it is a lot of fun. People always equate fencing to a physical game of chess, and it really is, because not only do you have to outsmart and outthink your opponent and try to stay one step ahead of what, trying to set them up, but you have to act it out physically and in a split second, and then react right away. And so it's a very challenging sport. It's a sport where you have to think fast on your feet and make quick decisions.
That's pretty intense, a physical game of chess. So I have a colleague that I work with. She's actually on, her name is Susie Cates, and she introduced me and all of our colleagues to fencing. And she has a coach that allowed us an opportunity to come in and put on the uniform, and she taught us some things. And
okay.
Yes, it was fun, and you get a whole new respect for fencing. So I say to everyone out there, if you have the opportunity to try it, because you will have a healthy respect for the sport after you put that uniform on. Last question for you, Dr. Frank. This comes from Jackie McWilliams, and she's asking, what legacy do you want to leave behind for others to carry for you?
Wow, Jackie, that's a good one. I just want to people to continue to reach out and provide opportunities for young people. I think we've been able to do that. We've expanded our program at Temple to bring in, we have a very diverse team, and just to continue to encourage young people to try, not to be afraid to try something new. We tend to not want to take chances and stay in our lane and stay in what we're comfortable with, and just to encourage people to step out of their comfort zone sometimes and to try something new, because you just, like me, I started fencing. I never knew where it would take me, but I can look back and say that fencing absolutely changed my entire life, my entire career, my trajectory, from the time it changed where I went to college. And it really has been I've been able to travel all over the world. As a kid growing up in Harlem, that wasn't something that you thought you would do. My very first international trip was to Russia. My very last trip was to China. And I went to a lot of places in between, some better than others, but still, just having that opportunity, you just never know what's out there. But if you don't step out of your comfort zone, you'll never find out.
Well, thank you for that. And Miss Jackie had one more question, which is your favorite, saber, foil, or EP? I hope I said that correctly.
Epee.
Epee. Okay.
I'm a foil coach. I was a foilist back in the day, women only fence foil. So I was a foilist, and that's what I coach, and I still love it the best. But they all are very different, and they all have their strengths as well as weaknesses. But I'm a foilist through and through.
Well, thank you so much for just being here today and speaking with us. I know the people who are on this Zoomcast, they all appreciated hearing from you and really like hearing what you had to say and just your energy. You're very calm, but you bring a lot more energy than I think what you think. So it was very nice speaking with you today. I was just so excited having you here. So thank you for that today.
Oh, it was great. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all those who tuned in.
All righty. Well, tune in on May 20th at 2 p.m. for episode 9, where I will be speaking with Ben Nguyen, Director of Academic and Membership Affairs at the NCAA. And please follow us on our social media platforms at Institute SSJ. If you ever miss an episode, we're also on YouTube as well. So again, please make sure to stay tuned for our next episode on May 20th. We thank you for all your support of Invisible Women in Sport. We are a nonprofit organization with other programs that impact various social justice issues. Please use the QR code to support us with a small financial gift as we continue to change lives through the power of sport. Thank you. Thank you again to our guest, Dr. Nikki Franke, our producer, Garnett L. Overby III, our senior advising consultant, Matt Edelson, our graduate assistants, Larissa Campello and Olivia Wiggins, and our blog writer, Kennedy Collins. A special thank you to all the organizations and the people that have been supporting us on this journey as well. Again, please follow us on all our social media platforms at Institute SSJ. If you have missed an episode, we are on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify, and you can find our old episodes there as well. Again, viewers, we need your feedback to make Invisible Women in Sport the best it can be. Following today's episode, you will receive a short survey, so please complete and submit that. And then again, tune in on May 20th at 2 p.m. for Ben Nguyen. I'm your host of Invisible Women in Sport, and see us now. All righty.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. It was really fun.
Thank you.